Welcome, everybody, to the very first time that my husband, Doug Noll, and I have come together to share tools for bringing in, creating, and healing intimate and also other relationships in your life. As Doug and I were reflecting just the other day about our relationship and the relationships that we witness in the outer world, we're realizing that people don't have that many practical tools that they can use to bring in a healthy, co-creative, collaborative relationship. We will typically be in very codependent relationships where there's a lot of fusion and a lot of confusion and frustration with the people that we love the most. And so he and I are going to take some time today to share with you, from my perspective, energetic ways of being in a healthy, right relationship, and from Doug's perspective, some very practical things that you can do inside yourself and with other people to de-escalate conflict and confusion. So here we go.
Okay, love.
And this is the first time we've ever done this, so we're very excited to be launching this in the world with you, and we thank you so much for joining us. My sense is for us to first kind of lay out the first challenge problem that I see a lot of. It's when we're in relationship with people that are not very receptive, i.e. they're not hearing us, they're not meeting our needs. We might feel frustrated because we feel like it's a one-way relationship. We're the ones giving. And so how can we, inside of ourselves, shift that energy? And I'm going to open that up to you.
Okay. Well, I think that fundamentally where we start getting into trouble in intimate relationships is our own feeling of rejection, where we feel like we're not being loved, we're not being appreciated, we're not being understood, and
or listened to,
or our need for intimacy is not being met, and the child in us is crying out for hugs and kisses and
to be understood
and to be appreciated, and nothing's happening because your partner is
shut down,
probably in the same place, feeling rejected, feeling abandoned, feeling like his or her needs aren't being met. And of course what happens is you get into a conflict cycle where people begin to shut down because they give up. And they say, well, I've tried and nothing's working, and so I'm just not going to make myself vulnerable anymore. So we build up these big barriers and walls and shells, and pretty soon we have a relationship that is empty inside. It may look great on the outside, but it's empty on the inside, and it's very painful and sad.
And people's also, their needs don't get met. And it's like every time I ask for my need, it doesn't get addressed. And
right.
I'm just going to be, again, this is our first one, so we're like in training a little bit. Stare at the little green dot. So when
right, look into the camera.
Look into the camera. So when we are in a relationship and we even think about asking for our needs to be met by another person, we immediately go to the place of, I'm not even going to ask because I'm just going to get rejected. And so also how to deal with that challenge.
Right. So here's the first secret, and that is that you will never get your own needs met until you can figure out how to meet the needs of your partner. And that can be really hard to do because there's no guarantee that there's going to be any kind of payback. There's no guarantee that if you are able to reach out and establish a deep empathic connection with somebody that you are in partnership with, that person's going to reciprocate. So it's a little bit of a high emotional risk. But if you don't take the risk, nothing will change. And so that's really the first place you have to come from, is you have to come from a place of saying, all right, I'm not going to ignore my own needs, but I'm going to try to reach out and create an empathic connection with somebody else and see what happens. So
how do you do that?
Well, I think that attitudinally the way that you can do it is to think about it as a laboratory experiment. So we have to listen to Doug and Aleya talk about this stuff. And so everybody around me is now going to become a lab rat. And I'm going to experiment with this stuff and see what happens. And I'm going to see what works and what doesn't work, and work at it from a very safe place so that you don't put yourself into an emotionally vulnerable situation. So I think that's where you first come from. But the problem that we see all the time in both our work is that people get into difficult problems in relationships because they're looking for their own needs to be filled by the other person before they're looking to fill the needs of the person they're with. And let me just also say that as a matter of reality, if you are able to use some of the tools that we're going to be talking about here in a few minutes over a period of time and nothing changes, then you are faced with what David Snarch calls a two-choice dilemma. And that is, do you want to remain, is this relationship healthy to remain in? And I think that my experience has been in teaching these skills that things really profoundly shift for most people. But there's always the possibility that it won't. So you have to be looking at that and thinking about, okay, I just have to be prepared to think about how I want to be happy if I can't find a way to be intimate with my partner.
And even if that relationship doesn't shift, at least you are being in the relationship in a way that is healthier and feels more appropriate and supportive for you, regardless of that other person. And there was something that you were saying, Doug, about meeting your needs. And when we're in a relationship with somebody that we don't feel is meeting our needs, at an energetic level, the very first piece that I do is I ask myself, what need am I asking that person to meet? And then I invite myself, bringing that awareness into what I call that divine line, that core river of light that flows down the front of the spine, inviting my higher self to work with my energetic fields, to locate where I appreciate myself, I respect myself, I am listening to myself. And then, as I'm meeting my own inner need, I then have the capacity to create a space where I can listen to another, where I can hold a safe and sacred space for another person.
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit about technique.
Yeah.
Okay, so the technique, the basic technique we want to explore with you is very, very simple to describe, not so easy to do. So let me give you a little bit of science, because pretty much everything I do is empirically based. So we have, as you all know, we have different parts of our brain that process all kinds of different information, very complex processing modules. So to keep it really simple, we have the front part of our brain called the prefrontal cortex, which has to do with executive function, and it's sort of the high-level processing where our consciousness, what we think is consciousness, may possibly have a lot to do with the prefrontal cortex, and it's what we do our analytical thinking. So that when we are listening to people speak to us, the words they're speaking to us, we are creating meaning, ultimately creating meaning in the prefrontal cortex, and we are being quite analytical about what do these words mean and how do they affect us. Other parts of the brain, which are not as well connected to the prefrontal cortex, are emotional centers of the brain. Some people, it's called the limbic system, but there are a whole bunch of little modules in the center of our brain, on the temporal lobes, that create emotional experience. And they are hooked up to the auditory cortex in a quite different way than the prefrontal cortex. And knowing this is very important, because when we are speaking to people, or when people are speaking to us, what they are communicating becomes very important. And so the first rule of this little process we're going to teach you, this technique, is to ignore the meaning of the words. In fact, ignore the words altogether. When people are talking to you, ignore the meaning of the words. You do not want to pay attention to the words. And what will happen is your prefrontal cortex will shift from paying attention and trying to analyze meaning, verbal meaning, to doing something completely different, which is what we're looking for. And that is, we want you to start paying attention to the immediate emotional experience of the person who is talking to you. We want you to be able to read their emotional data field. And you're going to do that by using all the tools that you already have. They're just innate tools that we all have as human beings. But now you're going to pay attention to them in a more conscious way. And what you're going to try to be doing is thinking about, what is the emotional experience this person is having right now as he or she is talking to me? What emotions? Are they frustrated, angry, apathetic, happy, joyous, satisfied, disrespected? All kinds of emotions, positive and negative.
Can I bring in a piece there?
Absolutely.
So a lot of us are incredibly empathically sensitive. We actually are feeling the feelings of that other person, and we're interpreting those feelings as our own. They're not our emotions. They are the other person's, which is a huge amount of data. You know how they're feeling. Use that information to create an empathic connection, which then de-escalates, which Doug's going to get into.
Right. So obviously, this works. Reading the emotional data field works best when you actually can be in the physical presence of someone who is communicating with you. And this is sort of the downfall of modern technology, is when you're dealing with email or you're dealing with text messaging or even chatting on video. There's a huge number of emotional cues that are filtered out by technology that makes it much, much more difficult to...
Then you just have to be psychic.
Well,
just kidding.
You have to be... Yeah, you either have to be psychic or you have to really fine-tune your empathic sensitivity, because even the word choice can give you some sense of what people are actually feeling. So it is possible to read emotional data fields when people are text messaging, for example.
And we're all empathic. We'll feel the empathic
We'll
sensitivity.
feel it, but it's obviously it's a lot more difficult and a lot more challenging. So here's the technique. When you are in a conversation with somebody, you're going to do a little, what I call a micro-intervention. This is going to last 15 seconds, 30 seconds at the most, and all you are going to do is replay for people what their emotional experience is in that moment. So, for example, somebody could be yelling and screaming at you, and you're not going to respond to the yelling and the screaming.
I'm so upset with you, I can't stand it!
You're really angry right now, and you're really frustrated, and you're really afraid of something. And that's how it goes. Notice that I did not respond to the personal attack on me, which is difficult to do.
You didn't take it personally.
I didn't take it personally, although it was directed to me personally. And the way that I was able to not take it personally was not to listen to the words. I could care less about the words that were being spoken. What I was really interested in was what Aleya's emotional experience was in that moment. And all I told her was, oh, you're angry, you're frustrated, you're sad, you feel disrespected. All I'm doing is labeling her emotions. This is based on the work of Matthew Lieberman, who is a neuroscientist at UCLA, who's done some amazing studies, scanning studies, to see how the human brain responds to empathic connection. And what he has found is that when we are able to simply label the emotions of the person we're speaking to, all kinds of weird things, good things, start to happen in the person's brain. One thing is the prefrontal, the limbic system, the emotional centers of the brain become inhibited, they quiet down, and the prefrontal cortex comes back online so that people can really start hearing you again. So, for example, the typical conversation would go like this. Do it again.
I'm so angry I can't stand it.
You are always blaming me for everything. How come? Get off my case.
God damn it, you can't listen to me.
You're never listening to me. All it is attacking. I'm never good enough. Come on, give me a break.
Get it.
Isn't that the way it usually works, right? All right, now here's the way that we're suggesting that you do
And you
it.
didn't say the I. You didn't. Okay, so.
We'll come back to that in a minute.
God damn it, I'm so upset with you. I can't stand it.
So you're really frustrated and angry.
I am angry.
And you're really frustrated at me, and you really are feeling sad because you don't feel listened to.
Yeah.
And you really want to be listened to, and you're feeling really, really sad and abandoned because nobody's paying attention to you, and I'm not paying attention to you.
And I just want to be heard.
And you just want to be heard.
And then I feel heard.
And then she feels heard. Now notice that she did something there, even though we're role-playing, a very key indicator that you're doing this right, and that is the nod of the head. When you have the nod of the head, you're done. The people will automatically nod their head. This is totally unconscious. They have no clue that they're doing this, but you're watching for the nod of the head. And when you get the nod of the head, you know you've been effective. And they won't even know that they've nodded their head.
Because when you're highly emotional and super escalated, the 90%, 98% of the brain is shut down. You're only 2% rational and 98% emotional.
I like to say that.
Maybe that's true. Maybe it's not true. At an energetic level, I feel that that's very true. Because we literally don't even know our emotion. And so for another person to reflect back to us our emotion makes us feel like we've just been heard. We are now safe. We are in a healing environment. And the key piece with what Doug is modeling and that tool that he's sharing is that he never goes into the I. I think you are feeling upset. He simply goes to that place of you. And you may even inside yourself feel anger. He's actually feeling my anger, my upset, so he can actually use his empathic sensitivity of what he's feeling inside of himself in that very moment to mirror back to me and share with me what he thinks that I might be feeling, but it's always from the place of you are feeling angry.
Right, or you are X. Now this is very different from active listening. Active listening came about, actually it was, people had observed a very famous psychiatrist, Carl Rogers, who was a humanist psychologist and psychiatrist in the mid-20th century, do amazing healing work. And they watched him create these empathic connections, and they thought that what he was doing was actively listening, simply parroting back what people said, using their words, parroting back their words. But what they didn't catch, what Rogers was doing, as it turns out, was he was really reflecting back the emotional experience of the patients that he was working with. So we got into this whole schmarmy active listening crap that doesn't work. Because if you repeat back the words, just simply repeat, and especially if you're doing it from a place of inauthenticity, well, we've all been there. We've all had it done to us. What's it feel like? It feels
gross.
like,
Gross.
It feels manipulative. It feels inauthentic, controlling, disrespectful. It's horrible,
arrogant,
and it's awful. So the secret is not to use the words. Ignore the words. And here's another reason why this is so powerful. When you are focusing on reading the emotional data field, you don't have any room for your own ego. You don't have any room to worry about whether or not you're being hurt by the words that are being spoken. You don't have any room for any of that in your brain, because it takes so much attention to read what the other person is experiencing. So it's very, very popular. Can I tell a story about this? Yeah. So the way that I learned about this, I stumbled on it, as we always do. And I'm not saying I invented this, because I don't think I did. But I did stumble on it in a moment of crisis. I was mediating a case between a couple who had been divorced for 17 years. And during the marriage, the children had been involved in an automobile accident. And it was a small matter, and there was a small settlement. But as is required under the law of most states, the money was put into a minors' trust that the parents were trustees of, and the money could not be used for any purpose until the children reached majority, in this case 18 years old. Well, after the divorce,
look at the light.
The children were still minors, and Mom took the money because she had it, because she was broke, and she took the money and used it to pay bills, and she basically violated the terms of the trust. Ex-husband became furious at her, actually a whole bunch of unresolved issues in their relationship, and so he sued her. And they came to me as a mediator, $50,000 in attorney's fees later, over an $18,000 problem. So I was listening to them tell their tale of woe, and the anger and the shouting and the screaming back and forth across the table, and I was just sitting there being present with all that, and I finally stopped it, and I said, wait a minute. Joanne, what I would like you to do is just listen to Terry's story, and I want you to ignore the words and just repeat back what he is feeling as he tells you the story. And I just stumbled on this. I was desperate. What was I going to do as a mediator? So I turned to Terry and I said, Terry, tell your story again. And so he starts the story, and Joanne can't do it. She starts spinning and blaming and screaming and yelling, and I quiet her down. I said, no. All I want you to do is to just simply state what his emotional experience is as he tells his story. So Terry was very patient with me, and he started again. And eventually she got it. And in a couple of minutes she said, oh, well, he's really angry right now. And she's looking at me. I said, well, tell that to Terry. Terry, you're really angry right now. And you're really frustrated. And you feel like you haven't been listened to. And so I said, yes, keep going. So Terry tells his whole story, and all that Joanne is doing is simply summarizing back the emotions. And in about 10 minutes, he finishes his story, and he stops and looks at her, and tears are streaming down his eyes. And he's saying, that is the first time you have listened to me in 25 years. And 15 minutes later, the case was settled. Went away. And I sat back and I said, oh, man, what just happened here? And that's how I figured it out. And then I learned about, many, many years later, I learned about Lieberman's work and what he was doing at UCLA.
Did they get back together?
No. But they became friends, and their whole relationship shifted. And the lawsuit went away, and nobody worried about the $18,000. I mean, it was beautiful to watch what happened, simply because they began to learn how to listen to each other in a very, very different way. And then began to practice the technique myself and honed in on it and began to teach it. And I remember one time I was in Florida a couple of years ago teaching a advanced mediation at a conference, and some guy in the back of the room started yelling at me. This doesn't work, it's a bunch of BS, just really personally attacking. You don't know who you are, you're some idiot from California, and just really personal attacks. And here I am with a group of 250 people teaching this workshop. So I just start to affect label. And the whole class sees what I'm doing, and they start to crack up. And this guy starts to nod his head, yeah, that's the way I feel. And finally he de-escalates, and I just turn to the rest of the class, and I said, see, it works.
And see, you just touched upon a really important piece, and it's that de-escalation. Mm-hmm. When somebody feels heard, there is de-escalation, and they then come back into the conversation and into the relationship because their deepest need literally got addressed by you simply recognizing their emotion. Now
here's the barrier. The barrier is that when you're in an intimate relationship and you're with somebody that you're emotionally very close to, by the time you have got into an intimate relationship, we know each other's triggers. And we push those buttons left and right. And we typically, Unconsciously, yep. That's right. We do it unconsciously. And so now what we're asking you to do is to recognize that your button is getting pushed.
You just got triggered.
You just got triggered, but you're not going to go there. You're not going to get reactive. You're not going to spit back some brilliant repartee or some insult or some sarcasm, or you're not going to shut down. What you're going to do is take a deep breath, focus on the emotional experience of your partner, and just name that emotion. Now, having said all that, that's not how we're going to start this process. Too dangerous. Kids, don't do this at home. All right, so the way you have to learn this stuff, because it's very simple to describe, but it's very challenging to practice. It takes work to do this, to make it natural. Let me just say this. If you do this and somebody feels that you're doing it, it means you're doing it wrong. It has to be so natural and so spontaneous and so authentic that nobody knows what you're doing. That they could not even tell what you're doing.
Which means in the beginning you might not be perfect or great at it, which is why we recommend practicing it with the coffee barista.
Right. So imagine you're going into Starbucks or your favorite coffee house.
Or a sandwich house.
Wherever. And it's early in the morning, or maybe it's lunchtime, and you get up to the counter, and here's this 18 or 19-year-old, 20-year-old college student who's taking your money. Read that person's emotional data field right back to them. Oh, looks like you're feeling really happy today. Oh, you're looking a little frustrated. Oh, you're looking a little harried. And just one emotion, one comment, and watch for the nod of the head. Watch for the reaction and see if you can penetrate past that person's prefrontal cortex into the center of their brain by doing this affect labeling, is what it's called, and see what the response is.
And you're not really penetrating them. You are actually helping them access a deeper part of themselves.
Correct.
Which increases their own self-awareness, but you have to have a certain level of self-awareness in order to do that. And if it feels too scary to do it out loud verbally, just do it silently as you're walking around in the world. If you're watching TV, what are the emotions of these individuals that are presenting themselves to you in your life?
Yeah, that's a great game. Using television, because of course television is all about emotion, and using that to read the emotions of the people on television can be a great way to practice this. Aleya makes a really good point. One of the reasons that this is so powerful is because oftentimes people will have an emotional experience and they don't even know that they're emotional. They don't even know they're just feeling something, and they're frustrated and anxious, and they just lash out. And so one of the great gifts you can give people is by naming the emotions. Even if you're wrong, you're helping them gain some clarity over what they're actually feeling, and that somehow allows the prefrontal cortex to start taking control so that they can calm down. I have seen this work in...
But what happens if somebody is sarcastic? They respond with sarcasm.
Okay, so let's do a little role play. So, in other words...
You behave a certain way.
So...
Pretend you're upset.
Man, I am really, really angry right now. I just can't. I'm so frustrated. I just can't believe what's going on.
So you're really frustrated right now?
Really frustrated. Really
You're
angry.
supposed to respond with sarcasm.
Yeah, hell yes, I'm frustrated. I'm really pissed off. Goddamn right. Can't you tell?
Yes,
Jesus, anybody. Affect label back.
I think you are really frustrated and really angry right now.
Really frustrated, really angry. Yes, I'm really frustrated, really angry.
But somebody, so on the chat, they're just saying that what happens if somebody responds with sarcasm?
Okay, if they respond with sarcasm, what does sarcasm tell us? It's still emotional. What are the emotions behind the sarcasm? Fear of abandonment, fear of loss, fear of connection,
fear of being seen, and then rejected,
frustration, rejection. So there are all kinds of emotional layers behind sarcasm. Just read back the emotions that seem obvious to you, and just keep reflecting back the emotions. People will continue to be emotional until
they get heard.
They get heard, and then what will happen? You'll get the nod of the head, and they'll say, yeah, they'll validate. They'll say, yeah, I'm really frustrated. I'm really angry. I'm really whatever.
Now here's another piece. If you feel like you're not in a safe environment with somebody who is constantly rejecting whatever you say to them, I invite you to start practicing this technique silently, holding in your heart the awareness that they're frustrated, that they're angry, that they're fearful. Just knowing energetically, emotionally what they're going through. And by simply holding that silently in your own self, it again takes you out of the reactivity. And then they feel energetically safe, and their behavior might start to shift.
Right. Okay, so there are a couple other subtleties to this technique that I want to point out. The first is we're not using I statements. So I'm not saying, oh, I hear you, as being very frustrated.
What about as a question, are you frustrated?
No, that's the second point. Not asking a question. You're making a statement.
Why not?
It's a declarative statement because you don't want to, you're engaging their midbrain with the statement. Once you begin to ask a question, then their prefrontal cortex has to answer the question, test the truth of your statement, and evaluate it against an emotional the emotional state, and that is too much work for the prefrontal cortex to engage in that moment. It creates too much of a metabolic overload, and so people will completely shut down. So you want to be very careful not to ask a question like, oh, are you frustrated right now? Well, goddamn right I'm frustrated. That doesn't work. Or to say something like, well, I hear you saying you're really frustrated. That doesn't work either because I'm injecting my own ego into the equation. This technique is very simple. Declarative statement. You are frustrated. Now, what happens if you're wrong? And many times you will be.
I'm not frustrated. I'm angry.
Oh, so you're
I
really angry.
just moved into self-awareness.
That's right. So what will happen, invite yourself to be wrong, because what will happen is people will correct you. They'll say, just like Aleya did, I'm not frustrated, I'm angry. And then you come back and say, oh, you are really angry. And it sounds like you're really sad. There's been a boundary violation here, and you feel really disrespected.
and I don't feel respected.
And you're not feeling respected, and you feel like there's been a betrayal here.
Right.
And it's really upsetting.
It is.
And
it happens all the time.
And it happens all the time, and you're just not happy about it.
It has to change.
And you feel like there has to be a change here because you're not happy the way things are going.
So notice on that one, I was asking for a solution, but he's still not providing the solution. He has to stay out of the fixing. So when we are listening to somebody and we are listening to their emotions and we are reflecting back to them their emotions, we are not trying to fix them. We are not trying to change them, and that is huge.
And guys have a really hard time with this.
Well, so do women. Women want to fix too.
So the secret, remember, this is just the first step in a whole lengthy process of developing an intimate relationship. And this is a micro intervention. This is something that's only going to last for 15 seconds, 30 seconds at the most. Maybe 90 seconds in a really aggravated situation.
It's not something you have to do for hours and hours and
hours.
hours.
It's going to be a really quick moment. Quick moment. And then after you've de-escalated, and you'll see to get the nod of the head, yeah, I'm really angry. And so if that's been processed enough and the prefrontal cortex is back online, then you can move into problem solving, and then you can invite another kind of conversation. You can say, well, you're really angry right now. Is this a good time to talk about what's making you angry? And so you can create the invitation to talk about what the issues are. And then, of course, if people get escalated, then you go back into the listening again. So you're going to recycle this back over and over again as necessary in order to be present with the person you're talking to. Mm-hmm. So the challenge, of course, is that when our own buttons get triggered and we're getting really upset and we don't feel like our needs are being met, and we're being disrespected and not being listened to, and our boundaries are being violated, and all this stuff is happening to us, can we maintain that place, that presence of mind, that place of enlightenment, where we ignore all of our own reactive stuff, all of our own needs for the moment, and see if we can be present emotionally for that other person to see if that won't shift the situation? That's the challenge.
And the energetic piece that I want to bring in is that so often we will emotionally, energetically hold responsibility for meeting the needs of our partner instead of letting the partner carry responsibility for meeting their own needs. The moment we carry responsibility for meeting the needs of a partner, we move into what I call a codependent, fused relationship. And if you wanted to bring in some energetic components to that, you're going to use that formula of inviting your higher self, your body David's higher self, your team to work with your energetic fields and the guides to energetically locate any responsibility that you are carrying for that individual that you're interacting with, for soothing them, comforting them, listening to them, appreciating them, loving them, and to send all of that responsibility back to them at the level of their higher self where they have the capacity to hold it. And then invite yourself to bring in responsibility for loving yourself, appreciating yourself, listening to yourself, respecting yourself. And as you do that internally within your own self, you are then able to interact and connect with another in that way, to hold a safe, sacred space for somebody as you hold a safe and sacred space for yourself. Another little story that I want to share is that early on in our relationship, when Doug and I first met, we would come upon topics that would be very triggering. And there was one point when we decided that we wanted to talk about this specific issue, and we made an agreement that whenever either one of us got triggered, we would individually remove ourselves from the environment, and we would come back into a place of calm, and then we would come back into the space and have the conversation. A 15-minute conversation took 4 hours. So I'm not saying that that's realistic in your life all the time, but I invite you to start pondering the idea of every single time you get triggered, recognize that you're triggered, remove yourself, bring yourself back into a place of calm, and then have a conversation from that place. But also being very clear that that person sitting across from you is not responsible for respecting you. You are responsible for respecting yourself. They're not responsible for supporting you emotionally or energetically. That is your job. And when we start holding those responsibilities internally and vertically, that fusion, that codependence and confusion start to dissolve.
So let me give you a couple other ideas here that you'll encounter as you practice this. One is, and one that I get every now and then, is, you're my goddamn therapist. You know,
right, so people that don't like having their emotions read.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'll challenge you or they'll push back. So you have two choices.
Look at the light.
You have two choices. You can either affect label again and say, you're really frustrated with me, I can tell. Or you can back off and you can say, all I'm trying to do is understand where you're coming from, and I'm sorry if I've offended. And just back off and come back at it another day. The other thing that tells me when people are giving me pushback on this sort of stuff is that I was inartful in the way that I expressed myself. I was either not coming from a place of authenticity, or
you weren't really in your heart.
I wasn't in my heart, or I did not make it so natural a part of my conversational style that people were able to pick up that it was an artificial response. That's when you're going to get the resistance. If you do this artfully, with practice, you will almost never get pushback. And as I get better and better at this, I get less and less pushback. You know, every now and then I'll get somebody who picks it up, and then I just have to back off. And there's some people you just can't work with. Mm-hmm. And, you know, this is not going to work 100% of the time. But it works well enough most of the time that it's a tool worth practicing, because it is extremely powerful. In my professional work as a mediator and peacemaker, I'm called to de-escalate people all the time, and this is my #1 technique for getting people de-escalated from extreme anger, where they really want to shoot somebody, literally, and getting them de-escalated to a place where they can sit down and talk about the problems and how to solve. And it is an extremely powerful, potent tool.
And when you are practicing this tool of reflecting back to somebody their emotion, I'm going to invite you to start getting more in touch with yourself about why you are actually speaking to them about their emotion. Is it because you have a need to create a safe environment for yourself? And therefore, if you start to speak the emotion to another individual with your own hidden agenda, that is going to be perceived as manipulative and controlling. And on some level, that is manipulative and controlling. So find inside yourself your own inner, safe, sacred space It is not their responsibility to create a safe space. They do not need to change their behavior. And then there's that other analogy that I use of let them be upset. Let them be angry. It is not your responsibility. We don't want to take responsibility for the choice of how other people behave. Again, that moves us into a codependent relationship. So when you are speaking the emotions to another person, drop into your heart. Consciously realize that you have no need, no desire to manipulate or control the outer world, this individual, that you are only responsible for controlling yourself.
That's so true. Another thing that I've learned over the years is that if you are not coming from your heart when you do this work, you will be perceived as being manipulative and false, and it will backfire big time. If you try to use this technique in a way to coerce somebody or convince somebody or persuade somebody to your way of thinking with your hidden agenda being first and foremost, people will pick it up in a New York second. And so it only works if you're really willing to try to be authentic with people in the moment. And that means you
totally
have to,
in the heart.
Right, and you have to be totally in your heart, which really requires you to be in a very enlightened stance in terms of where you are, because here you are being triggered and highly reactive and feeling like you want to lash out. And the part of you that's saying, I'm not going to make that choice to lash out, is got to dominate the biology part of you that says, I want to fight, or I want to freeze, or I want to run away.
So do you have a very practical tool for dropping into the heart?
I don't.
I
you?
do.
Okay, good. That's why we work together.
So if you realize that you do want to change the way you are responding and being in conflict, and literally use this conflict or this relationship to move to a higher consciousness, the very first piece that I invite you to do is to ask that the angelic realm, the ascended masters, you from the future as an ascended master, encircle you in another dimension and model to you how to move into the heart, which means you have 10, 15, 20 ascended masters encircling you in this very moment, in another dimension, in your imagination station, holding in their own hearts how to drop into their own heart awareness. They're not doing it for you. They're showing you energetically how to do it for yourself. And then you can employ that other dimensional aspect of yourself, I call it the higher self, your body's higher self, the energetic aspect of your physical human form, to energetically locate that love, heart connection with the divine inside yourself, vertically and internally. You do not need to open your heart to this other person. The only thing you need to do is have your heart vertically open like a flower to a sun to your own self. As you allow yourself to energetically feel, imagine, breathe that inner open heart, it automatically creates a horizontal reality of being able to then hold an open heart with another, but you first have to do it inside yourself. So if someone is super triggered, take a breath. Take a moment. Imagine the ascended masters encircling you, holding open hearts for themselves. Invite your higher self to activate the open heart within your own divine line. When you're lying in bed, when you're not in the face of conflict, start practicing the open heart inside yourself, literally standing in a river of light, open to your own divine essence and loving that part of you. And then you start to energetically hold a different frequency. And as your energy fields start to hold this vibration, your consciousness, your mind, your thoughts, and your emotions and your behavior will start reflecting back to you your energetic stance.
So let's take a few minutes and do some role plays.
Okay.
So we can just demonstrate all this with the time that we have left.
Perfect.
Okay. So you want to yell at me first, or you want me to yell at you?
You can yell at me.
Okay. Aleya, I keep telling you, put those tools back where they are. Every time I want to go to the toolbox, I can't find what I'm looking for, and I got to spend half an hour going all over the house looking for tools. And you want me to do these projects, but if I can't find the tools, how the heck am I going to get it done?
You're really frustrated.
I am really frustrated. I'm wasting my time looking for tools that should be in the toolbox.
And you feel like you're wasting your time.
I am. Really frustrated. And it angers me that I can't find the tools, and I just wish you would put them away.
You've got a lot of anger around this.
I've got a lot of anger around it. It's just really not so much anger. I'm just frustrated. I want to do good things for you. You asked me to do stuff, and I can't do it when I can't find the tools because you put a screwdriver in a flower pot or something, and I can't find it.
And you want to help me.
I want to help you.
But you can't.
I can't because I can't find the tools.
I hear that. Oh, see? I just did a mistake.
So what would you say instead?
You're really frustrated and angry.
I'm really frustrated.
And then silently, I'm going to be having a silent conversation And the silent conversation inside me is, I am holding a safe and loving space for you to be in your upset. You are choosing to be in this upset. If you were an ascended master, you wouldn't be upset, which means this upset is a mechanism you are using to spiritually grow and evolve. And there is no way I'm going to take that upset away from you. I am going to hold the safest, most loving space for you to be as angry as you need to be. So depending on where your partner is in its evolutionary process, I might actually out loud now in our relationship say, I am going to hold a safe and loving space for you to be as angry as you need to be and as frustrated as you need to be.
Okay.
Do that. Go there. So when I do that energetically and even verbally, depending on the awareness of your partner, how did that feel?
Well, it's Tai Chi, because what happens is there's no longer any resistance. So when you're not resisting, then I have nothing to push against emotionally,
Right.
and so it goes away.
Right.
All right, so let's do another role play.
Any questions on that? Oh, the video stopped. It could be your internet connection. We'll just go to another one.
Okay, try another role play. Why don't you come at me with something?
I get really upset when I come into the kitchen and the dishes are not done and I don't feel like you respect my time.
So you're really frustrated and feel disrespected because the dishes aren't done, and you feel like your time is not being respected by me, and it's really frustrating, and you feel sad because you don't think I love you, and you're feeling abandoned sometimes.
Yeah, and when you do the dishes, I feel like that's one way you share your love and you show your love.
So when I do the dishes, you feel like you're loved, and you feel like we're really deeply connected because I care about you.
True.
And when I don't do that, you feel a rejection and a sadness and an abandonment and a loss of intimacy.
I do. But now I'm going to go into a slightly more enlightened perspective, and then I'm going to say to you, but you know what? It is not your responsibility to love me, respect me, or appreciate me. I now have an opportunity to move into greater degrees of respect for myself, appreciation for myself, honoring myself, and honoring my time. It's not your job.
I have a question. So you wouldn't have gotten there, though, if I hadn't de-escalated the emotional center of your brain by affect labeling.
Exactly. So when he started to mirror back to me all of those emotions, I then started to reflect upon, is it even his responsibility? Do I need to actually honor and respect my own time instead of giving that responsibility to him? And then we moved again out of the fused, confused relationship.
Exactly. So this is a really powerful technique for building intimacy in a relationship. Again, I don't recommend that you do this
right
5
away.
minutes from now.
No, and that last piece was definitely a more advanced piece, and we're going to be actually doing this on a regular basis of doing televideos to share tools for healthy relationship, and this is just basically a little sample of what those are going to look like and feel like and be like.
So go out and practice this in low-risk situations. Low-risk situations. The baristas at the Starbucks.
People you don't know.
People you don't know.
Your dog.
Your dog, yeah.
Your cat.
Your dog, your cat. And it typically takes people a couple of weeks of practice, of being in conscious practice, to feel comfortable doing this, where they can start to feel safe. And then when you start to work in the more high-risk situations with your partner, 2 seconds. Just 2 seconds.
You're angry.
You're angry.
And that's it.
And stop. And get the reaction. Do not try to go into a full-blown affect labeling, empathic connection until you really, really have grown into it. And it'll take a month or two of practice. But I can guarantee it, if you take the time to master this, in most cases it should dramatically change your relationship, because what's going to happen is when you create that this is kind of interesting, because when you create the empathic connection, you're going to change the terms of the relationship, and one of two things is going to happen. Either your partner is going to respond in a really beautiful way and give you everything that you want and just reflect it right back unconsciously, or the relationship is going to become so frightening to the other person, because now that person really is facing a choice of deep intimacy that they're going to be frightened of it.
Or they're in a safe space and they then get to decide whether or not they want to move forward. But at the same time, you know, when I first got together with Doug, for actually the first 2 years of our relationship, none of my needs got met. And I knew energetically, intuitively, that he wasn't in a place to meet those needs. For 2 years, I modeled to him how to meet one's needs, and then after 2 years, you started meeting my needs. And that doesn't always, you know, it doesn't take that long usually, but depending on where the person is in their journey and in their process, If somebody's just getting out of a relationship, they might not be ready to get into a relationship. And so you have to ask yourself a question: how can you hold a safe and sacred space for you that still honors you and also helps you grow and evolve and move into greater degrees of self-awareness? And I want to leave you with one more tool, and that is, before you even, if this feels like it's too much to start practicing with another person, for the next 2 weeks, start holding greater awareness of how you are feeling inside yourself. I am feeling frustrated right now. Don't fix it. Just let it be. When we move into that place of acceptance, we actually start to open to some energetic aspect, our higher self, and we start to bring in solutions for shifting that discordant energy that we're feeling inside of ourselves. And the more self-aware we are inside of ourselves, the more self-aware we get to be with another individual.
Absolutely. Okay, so I think we're about ready to wrap up.
Okay. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm just going to